Rook Collin had never been one to seek trouble. He was a mechanic by trade, a former soldier by necessity, and a quiet, self-reliant man by choice. His life had settled into a predictable routine on a remote salvage station, orbiting a forgotten planet. The station itself was a small, scrappy place, filled with old shipwrecks and abandoned technologies that no one else cared about. But that was fine with Rook. It gave him the peace he'd been craving ever since he left his military past behind. It was on one of his usual scavenger hunts that things took a turn unexpectedly and irrevocably. He had just finished tearing apart a wrecked freighter when a strange sound reached his ears. It wasn't the clanging of metal or the hum of an engine. This was something different, something organic. His curiosity piqued. Rook set down his tools and moved cautiously toward the source. Hidden in the shadows beneath a massive pile of scrap, two large figures huddled together. Their bodies were covered in dirt and ash, their wings torn and battered. They were dragon's creatures he had thought to be nothing more than myth. Rook stood frozen for a moment, staring at the magnificent creatures. They were beautiful, though gaunt and clearly in pain. They didn't look like they belonged to any species of animal he had ever seen. Their scales shimmered with hues of deep emerald and gold, and their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, like embers slowly dying. The dragons noticed him immediately, their heads lifting as if they had been expecting someone. Though Rook doubted they had expected him, the larger of the two, a female, let out a soft, hoarse growl, her tail twitching nervously. The other, a male, stood a little taller, his claws scraping against the metal floor as he tried to rise. Rook took a cautious step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what to make of this situation. Dragons? Real dragons? The kind of creatures sung about in ancient myths? But the hunger in their eyes was what grabbed him. Their bodies were thin, their ribs visible beneath their scales. They hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer. Without thinking, Rook reached into the bag at his side, pulling out a ration pack. He didn't know if dragons ate the same things as humans, but it was all he had. He tossed the packet toward them, stepping back cautiously as he did. The dragons hesitated for only a second before the male darted forward, tearing open the packet with his claws. The female followed, her snout pressing against the ration as she sniffed it. After a long moment of hesitation, she began to eat. Rook watched in awe as the creatures devoured the food, their eyes now more focused on the meal than on him. It was an odd comfort to know that, at least for the moment, he had helped them. As they finished the ration, the dragons looked up at him, their eyes no longer filled with hunger, but something different, curiosity. The female made a low sound, almost like a purr, and nudged the male with her head. The male gave a soft grunt in return, as though agreeing with her. They turned back to Rook, their massive forms leaning slightly toward him. He took another step forward, feeling his heart still racing, but also a strange sense of connection with these creatures. I don't know what you are, or how you got here, he muttered, more to himself than to the dragons. But I'm not going to let you starve. The male dragon tilted his head to the side, studying Rook with a keen intelligence in his glowing eyes. The female slowly stood, towering over him. Despite their massive size, they moved with an elegance that betrayed their power. Rook could feel the weight of their presence, but instead of fear, he felt an odd sense of responsibility. These were no ordinary animals. These were sentient beings alive, with needs, emotions, and, perhaps, a purpose. Stay here, Rook said quietly, though he wasn't sure if they would understand him. I'll bring more, as he turned to go. He was acutely aware of the two dragons following his every movement. He knew the basics of their kind, at least from what little he'd read in old books and stories. But nothing prepared him for this. He'd never imagined he'd meet real dragons, let alone come across two in such a state. But one thing was clear, they were in trouble, and he couldn't just leave them to fend for themselves. Rook hurried back to his workshop, collecting whatever supplies he could. He grabbed more food, some basic tools, and his first aid kit. When he returned to the dragons, he found them exactly where he had left them, watching him with an intensity that felt almost grateful. The female nudged him lightly with her snout, almost as if asking him to hurry, while the male let out a low, soft sound, a mix between a growl and a hum. He worked quickly, providing food and bandages for their injuries. Rook couldn't heal them completely, but he could help them get back on their feet. They both allowed him to tend to their wounds, and as he worked, he began to feel a strange bond form between them. They weren't just animals. They were survivors, like him, and in that moment, something shifted within Rook, the quiet mechanic. Once just trying to live a simple life, now had two dragons under his care. He had never imagined this was how his day would go, but there was no turning back now. The dragons rested for a while, their breathing slow and steady. Rook sat nearby, watching them. He didn't know where they came from or why they had ended up here, but something told him this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. As night fell, Rook stood up and walked to the edge of the platform, looking out into the blackness of space. His life had just taken an unexpected turn, and he had no idea where it would lead. But he knew one thing for certain: the universe was far bigger and far stranger than he had ever imagined, and whatever came next, he was no longer facing it alone. Rook Collin had always preferred the quiet. His life on the salvage station was simple: find scrap, repair what could be fixed, and sell it for a bit of credits. But ever since he'd found the dragons, his life had shifted in ways he couldn't explain. It wasn't just that they were magnificent creatures, or that they were ancient beings thought to be only myths. It was something deeper, something he couldn't ignore. They were survivors, and Rook had learned over the years that surviving meant more than just living. It meant finding allies, and in the strange, vast universe he called home, these dragons were now his allies. The days after Rook found the dragons were spent in a haze of repair work and quiet conversation. The dragons, though large and intimidating, seemed to trust him. They allowed him to care for their injuries, bringing their great forms into his workshop where Rook worked tirelessly. The male dragon, named Threx, was the first to regain his strength. His scales began to shine with a deep, green hue, and his eyes, once clouded with pain, now glowed with an intense intelligence. His companion, Tira, was slower to heal, her wings battered and her body weaker from the long journey she had endured. Rook, in turn, became a student of their world. He'd always been a mechanic, skilled with tools and machines, but he had never worked with creatures like these. Tira and Threx didn't speak in words like humans did, but they communicated in ways that Rook soon began to understand. A soft growl meant hunger. A flick of the tail meant impatience. They didn't need to speak for Rook to know what they needed. As the days passed, Rook learned more about them. The dragons were not from this galaxy, but from a distant star system called Draconis. The Draconi were an ancient and powerful race, known for their intelligence and strength. They had built great civilizations, wielded incredible technologies, and lived for centuries. But their world had been destroyed. The Empress, a ruthless conqueror who ruled over vast territories of space, had wiped out their home planet in a brutal attack. The Draconi, once proud and untouchable, were now nothing more than refugees. Tira and Threx were the last of their kind, the survivors of an unsuccessful rebellion against the Empress's forces. They had fled their home, knowing that they could not defeat the Empress alone. The galaxy was vast, and the Empress's reach was nearly infinite. But even in their weakened state, Tira and Threx held a spark of hope. They had escaped the destruction of their world, and they were determined to fight back. "They will come for us," Tira's voice echoed in Rook's mind. It was not spoken aloud, but he understood it all the same. It was a strange sensation, this communication without words. The dragons spoke directly to his mind, sharing their thoughts and emotions with him in a way that was both foreign and familiar at the same time. "Who will?" Rook asked, adjusting a wrench as he worked on a broken-down shuttle in the corner of his workshop. "The Empress," Threx answered, his voice low but filled with strength. "She will not allow the last of the Draconi to live. She will hunt us, and she will destroy us." Rook paused, the weight of their words settling on him. He had known that the dragons were running from something, but he hadn't realized the full extent of what they had fled. The Empress was a name whispered in fear across the galaxy, a symbol of power and tyranny. She controlled vast fleets, entire star systems, and had an army unlike any other. If she was truly coming after the dragons, then Rook knew their time of peace was over. He had helped them, yes, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to fight the entire might of the Empress's empire. But Tira and Threx had already made their decision. They would not run any longer. They would fight. "We need to prepare," Tira said, her tail flicking with determination. "We will not allow the Empress to erase our people from existence. We will fight back." Rook nodded slowly. It was one thing to help a pair of dragons heal. It was another to help them take on a galactic empire. But Rook wasn't one to back down from a challenge, especially not when it meant helping those who had already shown him so much loyalty. They had saved him from a life of loneliness and monotony. They had given him a purpose again. "Okay," Rook said, setting down the wrench and looking at the dragons. "We'll prepare. I'll help you, but we need to know everything. Every little detail about the Empress and her forces. The more we know, the better our chances." Threx's eyes gleam with a sharp intelligence. "We have hidden technologies, ancient weapons that the Empress doesn't know about, but we need time to rebuild them. We need you, Rook. You are the key to restoring our strength." Rook didn't ask how they knew he was the key. In that moment, he didn't care. He had already made up his mind. He was all in. The Empress might have been the ruler of a galaxy, but Rook had dealt with worse odds before. He had survived wars, losses, and betrayals. This time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about something bigger, something worth fighting for. Over the next few days, Rook's workshop turned into a war room. The dragons, now fully healed and more determined than ever, began to teach him what they knew. Rook's mind raced as he absorbed the knowledge they shared. The Dracani were masters of technology and warfare, and they had built weapons that could level entire fleets. Rook had always been a mechanic, but he had a knack for understanding machines, especially the ancient Dracani tech. Tira and Threx showed him blueprints for a weapon that could pierce through the Empress's shields. They explained the principles behind Dracani energy sources that could fuel ships, far longer than any human technology could manage. They even taught him how to tap into the energy fields that powered their wings, an ability that could be used to power machines or even create devastating force fields. But the most valuable lesson Rook learned from them was this. The Empress had underestimated the Dracani. She believed them to be broken, their civilization destroyed. What she didn't know was that the Dracani were far more resilient than anyone could imagine. Their true power wasn't in their weapons, it was in their unity, their bond, and their will to fight. As Rook worked alongside Tira and Threx, his skills and their knowledge began to blend. He worked day and night, building weapons, repairing old technology, and preparing for the day when the Empress's forces would come. It was only a matter of time before the storm would arrive. But as the days passed, Rook couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. The Empress's forces weren't just coming for the dragons, they were coming for him too. And Rook Collin, the quiet mechanic who had once lived a simple life, was about to become an unlikely hero in a war that would change the galaxy forever. Rook Collin had always known that his peaceful life on the salvage station wouldn't last forever. He had hoped that it would, but deep down, he understood that the galaxy had a way of pulling you back into its endless conflicts. And when it came to Tira and Threx, the last dragons of the Dracani, the stakes were much higher than he ever imagined. It wasn't long before Rook began to sense the danger looming closer. The dragons had told him that the Empress and iron-fisted ruler of many star systems would come for them, but it was only when Rook started seeing strange ships in the distance and picking up odd signals on his radar that he realized how close the threat was. The Empress's forces were moving faster than anyone could have predicted. The salvage station had been quiet for weeks. Rook had been working day and night alongside Tira and Threx, fixing ancient Dracani technology, building weapons, and making plans. But every time Rook looked up from his work, he could feel the tension in the air. Like the calm before a storm, something was coming, and this time, it wouldn't be just another small raid or skirmish. The Empress wasn't sending a fleet to collect bounty or test their defenses. She was coming to destroy. On a quiet evening, while Rook sat alone in his workshop, the two dragons entered, their heavy footsteps echoing through the narrow hall. Tira's eyes were narrowed with determination, her golden scales glimmering in the light of the workbench. Threx, though always more reserved, was as tense as a coiled spring, his deep green eyes scanning the room as if expecting an attack at any moment. "The Empress's guard is approaching," Tira said, her voice cold but steady. "They've detected us. They know we're here." Rook's heart sank. He had hoped they would have more time. The technology they were working on wasn't finished yet. The weapon they had been building, the one that could pierce through the Empress's shields, still needed adjustments. And their ship Rook's most recent project was barely functional. It was a Draconi vessel, ancient and powerful, but it was also complicated and delicate. One wrong move, and it could fall apart before they even reached the stars. "How much time do we have?" Rook asked, his voice more steady than he felt. "Not long," Threx replied, his tone grim. "The guard moves swiftly. They will arrive in less than a day." Rook stood up from his workbench, feeling a surge of adrenaline. He couldn't let them down. These dragons had trusted him, and now he had to prove that trust wasn't misplaced. He had built the weapons, prepared the ship, and done everything he could. But now it was time for action. It was time to fight. "We're not ready," Rook muttered, pacing back and forth. "The ship isn't ready, and neither are we. We can't take on the guard with what we have." Tira stepped forward, her sharp eyes never leaving him. "We don't have the luxury of time. If we wait any longer, the Empress's fleet will destroy everything we've built. We fight now or lose everything." Her words hit Rook harder than he expected. He had spent years running away from battles, fighting only when he had no other choice. He wasn't a soldier. He was a mechanic, a fixer. But the dragons had made it clear. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about something bigger. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for their entire species, for their people who had been wiped out by the Empress's cruel ambitions. They were fighting for freedom. Rook didn't have much choice. He wasn't about to abandon Tira and Threx, not after everything they had shared. He had made a promise to them when he first fed them those rations that he would help. And now, helping meant fighting. "Okay," Rook said, taking a deep breath and turning toward the ship he had been working on. It stood in the center of his workshop, looking like a strange fusion of Draconi and human technology. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best shot. "We make do with what we have." Tira and Threx exchanged a brief glance before nodding. There was no room for hesitation now. They were in this together. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Rook, now fully in battle mode, started making the final adjustments to the ship. He worked alongside the dragons, who helped power the engines using their ancient energy sources. Threx's claws manipulated the ship's inner components with surprising delicacy, while Tira focused on preparing the weapons systems. They moved in sync, each of them knowing exactly what the other needed, as if they had been working together for years. It was a perfect balance between human ingenuity and Draconi power. Rook couldn't help but admire them. They were both so much more than he had ever expected. They weren't just powerful warriors, they were survivors, determined to protect what little they had left. And they were going to make the Empress regret ever targeting them. But as Rook worked, a feeling of unease began to settle over him. He could feel the weight of the situation. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight against an empire, an entire galactic empire. The odds were against them, and even with the dragon's strength and the advanced technology they possessed, Rook knew they were facing something far more dangerous than they could ever fully understand. The first sign that the Empress's guard had arrived came in the form of a massive shadow, casting over the station. The quiet hum of engines grew louder, and Rook looked up, his heart pounding in his chest. "They're here," Rook said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tira and Threx were already at their posts, preparing the ship for launch. Their eyes, however, betrayed their calm exteriors. There was a fire burning in them, a fire that Rook had never seen before. The Empress's guard was a formidable force. But these two dragons weren't about to go down without a fight. As the engines of the enemy ships roared louder, Rook finally stepped back from the ship, looking at the dragons one last time. "Let's do this," he said. Threx growled lowly in agreement, and Tira nodded, her wings fluttering lightly in anticipation. Together, they climbed aboard the Draconi vessel. Rook followed them in, closing the hatch behind him. The time for escape had passed. There was no turning back. They would fight. Rook set his hands on the controls, the familiar hum of the ship's systems now fully powered. "Hold on," he said, and with that, he punched the throttle forward. The ship shot into the vastness of space, and the Empress's guard was waiting for them. But Rook Khan wasn't the kind of man to back down, and with two powerful dragons by his side, he was ready to face whatever the Empress had in store for them. The battle for survival had begun. The space around Rook Khan felt like a silent void. The ship he piloted, a mixture of Draconi and human technology, hummed steadily beneath his hands as he guided it toward the incoming fleet. The Empress's guard had arrived, and with it came the deadly certainty that this fight would be like no other. The sheer size of the enemy ships dwarfed this small vessel. Rook's ship, despite being crafted with the best technologies available, was nothing compared to the firepower and resources the Empress commanded. But Rook wasn't alone. Tira and Threx, the last dragons of the Draconi, were at his side. The two dragons were not merely allies. They were the heart of this mission. Their powerful presence filled the cabin as they prepared for battle. Tira's golden scales shimmered in the dim light of the ship, while Threx's deep green eyes glowed with determination. Their strength, their will to survive it, was the only thing that gave Rook hope in this seemingly impossible situation. Rook's hands gripped the controls tightly, his mind racing as he reviewed the battle plans they had put together. The Empress's guard was known for their elite soldiers, their deadly ships, and their unrelenting nature. The odds of surviving this attack were slim, but the Draconi had weapons, ancient and powerful, that the Empress hadn't counted on. And Rook had something the Empress's soldiers didn't: his knowledge of machines, his quick thinking, and the will to fight for something greater than himself. "They're closing in," Rook muttered to himself as he glanced at the readout. The enemy fleet was fast approaching, their dark silhouettes cutting through the vastness of space. The main fleet, composed of sleek, heavily armed ships, was flanked by smaller vessel scout ships, probably meant to surround and trap them. "Prepare yourselves," Rook said to Tira and Threx, his voice calm despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. He knew that this would be their hardest battle yet, but he also knew that the dragons had something the Empress couldn't have predicted: untapped power that could change everything. "We are ready," Tira replied, her voice steady as always. Her wings flexed slightly, a sign that she was primed for battle. She wasn't afraid. Neither was Threx, who was already adjusting the ship's energy systems, using his ancient knowledge to boost the ship's power. The dragons could manipulate the ship's energy in ways Rook couldn't fully understand, but he trusted them completely. The first shots rang out as the Empress's guard opened fire. Rook didn't flinch. He pushed the throttle forward, sending the ship into a steep dive, narrowly avoiding the first barrage of enemy fire. The ship rattled, but it held together, the Draconi technology holding strong under the strain. "Hang on!" Rook shouted, swerving the ship to the side, dodging another volley of lasers. The ship's shields flared as they absorbed the hits, but Rook knew they wouldn't hold up forever. He had to act quickly. Tira roared, her voice reverberating throughout the ship as she used her own energy to reinforce the shields. Rook could feel the hum of the energy field growing stronger, and he realized just how much power the dragons were able to channel. It wasn't just their strength, it was their connection to the energy of the universe itself. They were using that energy to protect not only themselves, but also Rook and their ship. "We have to take out their main weapons," Threx growled, his sharp eyes focused on the enemy fleet. "If we don't, they'll keep firing until we're nothing more than space debris." Rook nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. He had built the ship with stealth and speed in mind, but they still lacked the firepower to take on an entire fleet. But the dragons had shown him something: a hidden weapon system, buried deep within the ship's core. It was a relic from the Draconi's ancient war, a weapon so powerful that even the Empress's ships would tremble before it. "Let's do it," Rook said, and he initiated the sequence. A series of deep, Resonating hums filled the ship as the hidden weapon powered up. Rook could feel the energy in the air shift, a palpable tension building around them. The ship lurched as the ancient weapon fired a beam of concentrated energy, so bright and powerful that it lit up the surrounding space. It shot directly at the closest enemy ship, slicing through its shields like they were paper. The enemy vessel exploded in a burst of light, debris scattering into the void. "Good hit," Rook shouted, his heart racing with excitement. But they couldn't celebrate yet. The rest of the fleet was still coming, and they were angry. Another round of fire rained down on them, but this time, Rook was ready. He dodged, weaving the ship between asteroids, using the space debris as cover. Tira and Threx, their eyes locked on the approaching ships, kept their focus, preparing to fire the ancient weapon again if needed, just a little longer. Rook muttered to himself as he steered them through the asteroid field. He had always been good with machines, but this felt different. It was as if he and the ship were one. The Draconi technology, combined with his own skills, was giving them a fighting chance. The enemy fleet closed in, and Rook could see the faces of the Empress's soldiers through the holographic screens. They were determined, merciless. But they hadn't accounted for one thing: the dragons. Tira and Threx weren't just weapons. They were a force of nature, and together, they had the power to turn the tide of this battle. "We're going in," Rook said, his voice firm. With a final push, he thrust the ship forward, straight into the heart of the enemy fleet. The ship's speed was unmatched, and with the dragons' energy boosting their shields, they were untouchable at least for now. As they plunged deeper into the fleet, the ship's weapons unleashed a barrage of fire, destroying one enemy vessel after another. The energy beam from the Draconi weapon pulsed again, tearing through the enemy ships with unstoppable force. But Rook knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The Empress's guard had more firepower, and they wouldn't stop until they had destroyed every last one of them. "We can't hold them off forever," Rook shouted. "We need a way out." Threx's eyes narrowed as he looked ahead. "There's a gap in their formation. We can break through." Rook didn't need any more convincing. He gunned the engines, sending them barreling toward the gap in the enemy lines. The ship shuddered as they passed through, the air crackling with energy as they made their escape. "We're not done yet," Tira said quietly, her voice full of resolve. "But we've made them pay for underestimating us." Rook didn't look back. They had made it through the first wave, but the battle was far from over. They were still in the heart of enemy territory, and the Empress's forces wouldn't rest until they had crushed them. But for now, they had a chance, and that was all Rook needed. With Tira, Threx, and the ship at his side, he was ready for whatever came next. The fight for survival was just beginning. The battle for survival had never felt more real. Rook Cullen could still feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins as he sat at the helm of his ship, the battle-worn vessel now a symbol of everything they had fought for. His hands gripped the controls, but his mind was elsewhere, on the dragons, on the mission, and on the looming shadow of the Empress's wrath. They had escaped the first wave of the Empress's guard, but Rook knew it was only temporary. The Empress would not let them slip away. The galaxy had long been under her control, and she would not tolerate any threat to her power, especially not from two ancient dragons and a mechanic, who had somehow managed to outsmart her forces. "Where do we go from here?" Rook asked, his voice low, more to himself than anyone else. His eyes remained locked on the holographic display in front of him, showing the aftermath of their escape streaks of enemy ships scattered across the stars, wreckage floating in the vacuum of space. The Empress's fleet was regrouping, but there was no time to celebrate their victory. "We need to strike back," Tira said, her voice steady and full of purpose. Her golden scales shimmered in the dim light of the ship's cockpit, and her eyes were filled with the fire of a dragon ready for war. "If we wait, they'll come for us again, and next time, they'll be more prepared. We must act before they can reorganize." Rook nodded, though doubt lingered in his mind. The dragon's plan was risky. They had one more weapon, an ancient Draconi relic, a device capable of disabling the Empress's fleet. But using it would require them to enter the heart of the Empress's stronghold, the Imperial Station, a heavily fortified fortress that was nearly impossible to infiltrate. "Do you think we can make it?" Rook asked, turning toward Threx, who was watching the stars outside with an intense gaze. The male dragon's expression was unreadable, but his posture radiated confidence. "We have no choice." Threx answered, his deep voice calm but filled with resolve. "If we don't destroy the Imperial Station, the Empress will come for us again, and next time, we may not survive." The gravity of the situation settled over Rook. They were about to face the full wrath of the Empress's power, and there was no turning back. But despite the fear gnawing at the edges of his thoughts, he knew they were right. This was their only chance to stop her. The weapon they carried, the Draconi relic, was their last hope. Rook took a deep breath and steeled himself. "Then we go," he said, his voice firm. "We go, and we fight." The journey to the Imperial Station was perilous. The Empress's fleet was still regrouping, but their presence was undeniable. Rook could feel the weight of their eyes on him, always just one step behind, waiting for any mistake. The ship's systems were pushed to their limits, and Rook was constantly tinkering with the controls, making sure everything stayed in working order. Tira and Threx helped with the energy systems, their ancient knowledge of Draconi technology allowing them to manipulate the ship's power in ways that were almost unnatural. But even with their combined strength, the journey was slow. The closer they got to the Imperial Station, the more intense the atmosphere became. Every sensor, every warning light, seemed to pulse with danger. The Empress's forces were everywhere, and Rook could almost feel the looming threat of their ships closing in. But Tira's calm reassurances kept him focused. "There is no other way," she reminded him whenever the doubts crept in. "We must destroy her. For all our people." For the Draconi, as they neared the Imperial Station, Rook's heart raced. The massive fortress loomed before them, a sprawling structure that stretched across the stars like a dark titan. Its shields were impenetrable, its weapons powerful enough to obliterate entire fleets. It was the heart of the Empress's empire, a symbol of her control over the galaxy. Rook's hands trembled as he adjusted the ship's trajectory, steering them into a small, uncharted space between two larger debris fields. It was a risky maneuver, but it was their only chance to approach the station without being detected. Tira and Threx stood by, their eyes scanning the area for any signs of enemy movement. "We're in position," Rook said, his voice low as he ran a final check of the ship's systems. "Once we're inside, there's no turning back. We have to get to the central core and deploy the weapon." The dragons nodded in unison, understanding the weight of the mission. They had trained for this moment, preparing for the day they would face the Empress. But even they knew the risks involved. This wasn't just a battle. It was a final stand. Rook took a deep breath and engaged the ship's cloaking system, his heart pounding in his chest. The ship hummed softly as the cloaking field activated, blending them into the background of space. They were now invisible to the Empress's scanners, but it wouldn't last long. They had only a few minutes before the station's patrols would pass by. "Now, we wait," Rook said, his voice tight with anticipation, for what felt like an eternity. The ship remained motionless, drifting in the silence of space. Rook's eyes never left the redouts. He could feel the tension building inside him, the weight of their mission pressing down on him. But then, the moment came. The patrol ships passed by, and the cloaking field remained intact. The station was now in range, ready, Tira said, her voice full of determination. "Let's end this." With a final, decisive move, Rook throttled the ship forward, heading directly toward the Imperial Station. The shields of the station flickered as they neared, but Rook pushed the ship through, relying on their stealth and speed. They entered the massive docking bay with barely a whisper, unnoticed by the station's defenses. Rook's hand shook as he landed the ship. "We're in. We have 10 minutes before they detect us. We need to get to the core." Threx growled low in his throat. "Then let's move. We won't waste any time." Together, the trio exited the ship, the cold air of the station's interior hitting them. The halls were quiet, the corridors empty, but Rook knew better than to trust the silence. The Empress's soldiers would be here soon. They ran through the darkened hallways, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. Rook led the way, using his knowledge of the station's layout to guide them toward the core. Tira and Threx stayed close, their eyes sharp, constantly scanning for danger. Finally, They reached the heart of the station, the central control room. Rook approached the console, his fingers flying over the controls as he activated the Draconi weapon. The energy inside the relic pulsed, and Rook could feel the power building. This was it. The Empress's reign was about to end. The console beeped. The weapon was charging. But then, the doors behind them exploded open, and a team of elite soldiers rushed in. The Empress's wrath had arrived. Rook's heart skipped a beat. They were out of time, but there was no turning back now. Tira and Threx leaped into action, their claws tearing through the soldiers with brutal efficiency. Rook, his hands still on the console, watched in awe as the dragons unleashed their fury. The room became a storm of fire and fury, and Rook knew that the weapon was ready. With one last command, he triggered the final sequence. The weapon activated, sending a pulse of energy throughout the station. The central core began to collapse. The Empress's stronghold was crumbling. The reign of terror was over. Rook, Tira, and Threx ran for the exit, their mission complete. The Empress's empire was on the brink of collapse, and the last hope of the Draconi had succeeded. They had won.